Good afternoon and welcome to Midday Report here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Following Prime Minister Donald Tusk's announcement earlier this week, Poland has reopened 5 border crossings with Belarus. 2 car and 3 freight train checkpoints opened at midnight last night. They closed on September 12th on account of the joint Zapad 2025 military exercises carried out by Moscow and Minsk in Belarus.
The reopened crossings are once again buzzing with traffic, with hundreds of cars lining up even before the checkpoints opened at midnight.
I waited here in Poland, unemployed. It was a very stressful time.
The borders were closed for just under 2 weeks.
It was a difficult time for all of us, not just Belarusians, but Poles too.
Thousands and thousands of small and medium-sized businessmen from eastern Poland who are suffering because they couldn't do their everyday job, moving goods from Belarus border area to Polish border area.
According to experts, the closure was likely to have negative effects on European trade with China.
This border is to a certain extent very significant for China, because this is the part of the China-Europe Express, which is in turn part of the new Silk Road.
Polish authorities justified the closure as a preventative measure, as Minsk and Moscow conducted the Zapad 2025 military exercises on Belarusian soil between September 12th and 16th, adding that the border crossings will be reopened under assurances of the Polish citizens' safety. But experts say these weren't obtained.
None of these conditions, which were formulated by the members of the Polish government, on the day of shutdown of the border were fulfilled.
Adding that Belarusian interests in the West are much more American-focused. The Washington-Minsk relations have improved recently, as the U.S. administration eased sanctions in exchange for the release of some political prisoners held by Lukashenko's regime.
Conditions put by the Polish government could be the secondary in comparison to the dialogue Lukashenko maintains now with American envoys.
The Polish Prime Minister said that despite the borders reopening, Warsaw is prepared to close them again if the need arises.
Moldovan business magnate Vladimir Plahotniuc detained in Greece on a warrant linked to a $1 billion fraud case landed in Moldova's capital Chișinău after being extradited. The extradition comes just days ahead of the Moldovan parliamentary elections, which will determine the future trajectory of the country.
Vladimir Plahotniuc is back in Moldova, a former lawmaker widely regarded as one of Moldova's richest men. He's a suspect in the country's so-called theft of the century, the disappearance in 2013 of $1 billion from the Moldovan banking system, equivalent at the time to 12% of the country's GDP. Before fleeing Moldova in 2019, he was the leader of the Democratic Party, part of the governing coalition from 2016 to 2019, and served as Deputy Speaker of Parliament. He was arrested at Athens airport under an Interpol notice after boarding a flight to Dubai. The oligarch denies any wrongdoing, claiming the allegations are driven by political hatred. His arrival comes days before a high-stakes parliamentary election in Moldova, where the ruling pro-European Party of Action and Solidarity will likely struggle to keep its majority against pro-Russian options in the country. The vote could have sweeping consequences for Moldova's bid to join the European Union, a process it says Moscow is attempting to derail.
Disinformation has always been a tool of Russian influence in Moldova, but especially since the war in Ukraine, it has intensified a lot.
One of the widely used narratives ahead of the elections is discrediting the West.
Their strategy right now is to try to paint the EU as being just as bad as Russia. So we see all of these narratives that the EU wants to steal our resources, the EU is a colonizing power and it will colonize us. Or why would you change? You changed an empire for another empire. That's another type of narrative that's circulating.
Nestled between Romania and Ukraine, Moldova balances EU aspirations with Russian influence. Incumbent President Maia Sandu's pro-Western stance has accelerated EU integration talks, with candidate status granted in 2022. However, economic challenges, energy dependence on Russia, and political polarization continue to test Moldova's sovereignty.
Hungary is reeling from the so-called Sulu Street scandal, a story of child abuse, political cover-ups, and now a government in full panic mode. Opposition leader Peter Magyar says Viktor Orbán's team rushed out a decree so sloppy it contained 20 spelling mistakes and even released an investigation before it legally began.
Opposition leader Peter Magyar has put Viktor Orbán's government on the defensive, accusing it of a cover-up in Hungary's most shocking scandals in years. The case centers on the Sulu Street Juvenile Correctional Institution in Budapest, where children suffered systematic abuse for over a decade.
The decree was published in the Hungarian official journal at 12:55 today, only then entering into force. Yet Justice Minister Tujan had already unveiled his supposedly extremely thorough report aimed at deflecting attention from the crimes against children before 12:55. In other words, the government released the findings before the Justice Minister was even legally empowered to start the investigation.
The scandal broke when reports revealed brutal mistreatment inside the Sulu Street facility, implicating its director and raising questions about how long the government knew. Instead of demanding accountability, Orbán's cabinet blamed foreign intelligence for fueling the outrage. Critics say this shows total disarray at the top of government.
We can see a sort of panic in the reaction of the government. Also regarding Fidesz politicians, their rhetoric seems to be so aggressive that it might be not efficient.
But will it be enough for the Fidesz party to lose popularity?
Last elections, some months before the elections, there was a feeling, especially in Budapest, that it's over, that Orbán will be lost. But it did not happen. In the very last month, the political mood has changed. Then Russia invaded Ukraine, and Orbán used this as a bad excuse to talk about peace.
Hungary's ruling Fidesz now faces mounting pressure from child abuse scandals to unpopular energy deals and is slipping in the polls. Whether the outrage over Sulu Street will finally dent Orbán's political armor remains uncertain. But in Budapest, the sense is growing that this time voters may not forgive so easily.
Pressure is mounting on Hungary and Slovakia to seize imports of Russian crude and natural gas, with US President Donald Trump urging Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán to ditch Moscow in a Wednesday phone call on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meeting. Both countries are pushing back against those persuasions, but experts say that if they wanted to end reliance on Russian energy, they could do it immediately.
This is the United Nations General Assembly Hall, where once a year a gathering of world leaders takes place. And Donald Trump had a message for the attendees.
China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase Russian oil. But inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy.
Those NATO countries in question? Hungary and Slovakia. Both have done little to slash their energy imports from Moscow since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, despite European pledges to ditch Russian oil and gas. And both argue that making the switch is not so easy.
We used to build the infrastructure, I mean the gas pipeline and crude pipeline, for decades. And we don't have any other options which could be sustainable and also the price reasonable and so on. So it takes time to diversify this. So that's why we are calling for some kind of empathy.
The problem with this logic is that other countries have managed to do away with Russian crude and gas. Poland is the prime example, with the country's multi-year effort culminating in a total phase-out of Russian energy in 2024. But even countries in similar geographic circumstances to Slovakia and Hungary, like the Czech Republic and Austria, have also managed to shrink Russian imports.
Hungary and Slovakia can phase out crude oil, Russian crude oil next year, in the beginning of the next year. There's no technical, economical, and other problems with that.
When it comes to natural gas, Slovakia could use an interconnector with Poland, which has enough capacity to cover the country's needs. When it comes to oil, both countries could use the Adria pipeline. But Hungarians have been reluctant to do so, blaming the pipeline operator for expensive fees. But with pressure from the other side of the Atlantic, and the European Union's newest plans to slap tariffs on Russian energy imports, Fico and Orbán may just not have any other option but to say goodbye to Moscow's cheap supplies.
In 2023, the European Union deployed a monitoring mission in Armenia to help stabilize the border regions and promote security in the aftermath of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. Observers are working on the ground to build confidence, support peace efforts, and provide impartial reporting on the situation. Our correspondent Diana Skaya had a chance to patrol with them along the borders, and we go to her now live right now in Yerevan, and she's at the military cemetery, I believe. Good afternoon, Diana. Tell us about the significance of where you are right now.
Hi, Marie. So we had a little bit of problems actually getting here, of course, with security. However, the significance of this is what you see here behind are Armenian flags and flags of Nagorno-Karabakh. And we're here at this military cemetery, mainly where all these soldiers, over 5,000 Armenian young soldiers that are buried here after they were killed in the fight with the Azerbaijanis in the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. Now, I'm just going to step aside here for you to see just really how young they were. For example, you can see here one boy, Arkady, born in 2001, and another one, Rob, also young, born in 2002. Everybody here, Marie, is young. Another boy, born in 2001. We're seeing behind here mothers, parents who are coming here crying, putting flowers on the graves of their loved ones that they lost. Now, Marie, the significance of this here is that it's important because the EU mission that we visited yesterday in Yerevan, it's about a 2.5-hour drive from Yerevan, was established after the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2022. They were very much present in 2023 after the last Armenians, the over 100,000 Armenians that were exiled by Azerbaijan into Armenia proper, and they said now they established missions. Of course, they're sent there by Brussels, and their main job, when we patrolled with them, was to monitor and secure, of course, the Armenia border, the shared Armenia border with Azerbaijan, also with Turkey. Now, what we saw, what they showed us, was how they monitor, and what they precisely look for is if Azerbaijan actually sets up new military posts on the mountains. And Marie, they also took us in close. We saw the Nakhichevan corridor. And to remind our viewers, this is where, also known as the Zangezur corridor, which following the signature between Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev, and President Donald Trump, this is where the Trump railroad will be created. But just to show the significance of it, and one of the main things I also met there was the head of the EU mission to Armenia. And one of the very interesting things he told me is that Russia is, of course, not happy with their presence and views them as Western and NATO spies. This is exactly the wording he used to describe their mission in Armenia. And then we actually went to speak to some residents of Yerevan, and I asked them whether they feel safe, because this is something I wanted to confirm with what the EU had told me, and asked them whether they feel safe and what they would do if the EU mission was to shut its doors. For instance, tomorrow, I remember the first boy that I met said, I can't even imagine what I would do. Probably we would fear a second war again, or that there would be snipers in the mountains shooting again. Many of the women were actually scared to speak to us. And then another lady I met actually started crying, remembering this war of one of her family members that is buried in this military cemetery called Yerevan in Armenia. And at the end, Marie, what she said, even though there was a declaration that was signed, she unfortunately didn't believe that peace could be possible. Yet at the end, what she told me was, and still I would never wish upon my enemy what they did to us. Marie?
Diana Skaya reporting from Yerevan in Armenia. Thank you so much for that fascinating report. And this concludes Midday Report. Thank you so much for joining us here on TVP World. We'll see you very soon. Goodbye.